HR Advanced webinar on preventing mountains from molehills, and that's tips for managing performance in your business. I'm Alison Williams and I'm Managing Editor here at HR Advance, and joining me today is our speaker, Tamara James. And Tamara is speaking to us today from Orange in the New South Wales Central West. Welcome, Tamara.
Thanks, Alison. Yes, I'm a workforce specialist with Pulse HR, and I spend a lot of time in the space supporting managers and supervisors to feel competent, confident and compliant with their performance management.
Fantastic, Tamara. We're so glad to have you with us today. Now, before we start, I'd like to get some idea of how confident you are in handling performance issues. So on your screen right now, you should see a poll question. So this will be coming up shortly. So please take a few minutes to just give me your assessment. Coming shortly. Okay. All right, thank you. So look, Tamara, I'll hand over to you now, and I'm sure everyone's in for a really interesting webinar today.
Thanks, Alison. So in a nutshell, we're going to take a high-level overview of performance management today. Ultimately, performance management is an active and ongoing activity by leaders to ensure the business is gaining the best return on investment from their workplace participants. Today's webinar, we're going to take a look at a couple of different aspects, but one of the key messages that I'd love for you to take away is that you ultimately can't manage what you don't measure. In this day and age, within our businesses, we're tracking sales, we're tracking social media engagement, market leads, but all too often I'm observing that we hire employees and we virtually set them free on their own course within our businesses. I guess there's two aspects or two sides of the coin that we can take a look at from a performance management aspect. So ultimately, the high level point around performance management is ensuring that we're connecting our business strategy to our people capabilities. On the other side of the coin that we are going to find from time to time is that we're going to need to raise unmet expectations with our employees or workplace participants, and ideally spend time realigning those expectations. So today is around pinpointing, I guess, some of those activities that as managers and leaders within our businesses we can actively put into place. I find and observe reasonably regularly that there tends to be some employer self-sabotage when they have recruited, gone through the process and have a person within their business, and it starts to actually not go to plan, so to speak. And really, if we're looking at root cause of how we can do and think better about this particular situation, is if we go right back to the beginning of when we're looking to recruit people, is that have we been brutally honest when scoping a position? So really being honest around what needs to occur, what responsibilities, how we would describe that particular person and what they need to arrive within that position with, so certain skills, qualifications and the like to be successful. At times I can observe that we haven't got to the real key points of what we need from that particular person by the time they arrive, and then ultimately they begin to underperform and not meet our expectations. Being really focused on writing adverts with the law of attraction in mind, using the right descriptive words and describing the culture of the organisation and the type of person that we're trying to attract over just the types of skills or qualifications that we need them to have. Ultimately, it's quite common that we find that we hire for skill and fire for fit, and that is a long-term particular issue within businesses. I think from a HR or leader or manager point of view is also being acutely aware of the management style of the manager that the new employee will report to, and thinking about what that looks like, that style and that wiring, and who's going to actually best dovetail in to that particular team can ultimately have some success or doom for whether things pan out well. One of the other points that I often find is, does the organisation have values? Are they communicated them? And then is the business actually living them? And being able to socialise new recruits as part of the onboarding process and part of the induction process to those expectations as they come into the business. One of the other items that I often see might be a little bit lagging or a lack of time invested into this process is actually developing a holistic position description, or otherwise known as a success profile. So thinking about the types of responsibilities, if I'm handling these things or taking care of these things well, I'm actually succeeding in my particular position. Thinking about what it means to be a team member, I guess it's a little bit like a share household at times, is that, I mean, what are those rules of engagement, and if respected, is that we help people within our teams fit really well. Thinking about the type of behaviours that we're looking for, how we would describe the person that we're looking for to really succeed in that particular position, and being able to offer this feedback as part of the onboarding process to shortlisted candidates before a job offer is made. Have you, undertaken a comprehensive and onboarding process and induction? Ultimately, that is so crucial. It's the point of socialisation of an employee into the business, and it can really set yourself up for heading down the right path longer term if it was communicated as part of the advertising, communicated as part of the onboarding, and then obviously moving forward and continual follow-up with that once the employee is on board. Ultimately, I often get asked around underperformance type matters, and it's been occurring for so long that managers or leaders are struggling to figure out when is the actual right time to bring something up that has been occurring in an understated way, possibly for quite some time. And I would suggest that it's never too late to communicate your expectations. We're running businesses, we want them to be successful, and being the captain of your team or your ship, and that is that sometimes it is about communicating that we're slightly off course and that we would really like to get back on course to steady the ship, so to speak. This can be done in a number of different ways. It can be tricky at times to bring up a certain topic with one individual employee. I think communicating broadly and to a whole team is that this is a particular focus area, and I would like everyone to be mindful of that. Ensuring that your policies and procedures are supporting your expectations and your business strategy. These are not items that should be written and released once and filed away. These should be living documents through time that you're constantly going back and referring to and updating to ensure that, again, they are guiding documents to really help your team ensure that they understand what is expected of them. Regular team meetings, I can't encourage you enough to communicate. I'm yet to see many businesses that over-communicate. I see many businesses that ineffectively communicate, but ultimately not over-communicating. There could be ways of doing things better or streamlining it, etc. But ultimately making sure that you're providing that point in time where the team can actually focus on themselves and what we need to do to take our roles and our positions forward, etc., over being very task-orientated meetings, for example, where we're just talking about the doing and maybe less about what we actually need to curb or do more of or less of, etc., from a behavioural and value-based aspect. One of the other activities that I also find when there's really tricky matters that need to be raised, and that they are around performance and leader or manager satisfaction with whatever is going on within a business, is that a suggestion is to actually conduct a survey. It means that all the information can come within your business and within your team, and it provides an opportunity for you to provide some feedback as the manager or the leader or the business owner about how satisfied you are with the business performance. You can focus on what you would like to see more of, what you would like to see less of, and it takes away that onus of who. And then vice versa to that is actually asking for feedback from your workplace participants around their particular job satisfaction and how they're feeling about culture within the business at that point in time. And what better way to start a conversation than to have that type of data. And it just goes back to that original comment, is that you can't manage what you don't measure. So you'd be able to then have some decent data about a current state of play and about items then you can start to tackle first some other areas. I think surveys also provide a really good opportunity, is that whilst we're constantly focusing on improvement, is that surveys also allow us to take a few moments to smell the roses and actually sing our praises in certain areas that as a group, a team or a business is that we are actually doing really well and kicking goals with. So can't encourage you enough to think about this, even in the context of a starting point towards a performance improvement process for a team or a more senior individual potentially. Okay, so thinking about some of the other aspects that we have in our toolbox, if you like, around performance management, is just being acutely aware about the difference between the documentation that we have available to us as managers and business leaders. Is that the employment agreement is primarily a document that creates the legal rights and obligations between the employer and the employee. It really is only able to be modified when it's a mutual agreement. It's consent between the employer and the employee. One of the really key critical clauses within your employment agreement should be that you always have the employee agrees to comply with all current and future policies of the employer. Going out of this particular webinar is actually having a look at how you actually have your job descriptions as well. They should be an attachment, so to speak, or linked to the actual employment contract, but not so much embedded within that. The same again for policies and procedures. These are documents that you are going to want to have access to update, to actually refine, to reword if necessarily, to get that message out there about what your expectations are. And if they are all bundled up within the employment agreement, is that we go back to that initial comment, is that has to be a consensual, mutual process between the employer and the employee. So something to be mindful there, and just understanding how your documents can work best for you. Policies and procedures. Ultimately, this is about documenting and communicating. It's 101 about setting the expectations from the very beginning. Can't encourage everyone in this day and age especially is to have something such as a handbook or a manual in place that really captures the main policies and procedures, as well as other ones that could be suggested or recommended approaches to X, Y, and Z within your businesses. Many cases that I have observed that have ended up in a fair work situation is matters that have become weakened because the business has failed to follow the policy or procedure that was in place, particularly around grievance resolution and the like. If you have these documents in place, please make sure that you're actually reviewing them in context of you being a leader or manager that is needing to actually deal with an underperformance matter, and taking a look at whether you're quite comfortable with what that policy or procedure says, and that you will find that you're quite comfortable in actually following that to a T. Because ultimately speaking, what has occurred, or the particular issue that you're frustrated by, or the misconduct that has played out within your business, yes, that could be a rather black and white situation, is that yes or no, they did engage in this. But ultimately speaking, when you then step forward trying to either go down a grievance resolution track or a performance management approach is that if you don't follow that policy or procedure, is it could come back to bite you down the track. One of the key messages that I'd love to get across in this particular webinar for you to go away and look at your policies and procedures, take a look at how often the word will is used within those policies and procedures in difference to may. Those two words can provide very different outcomes to how you might roll forward in managing a performance matter within your businesses against the policies and procedures that your employees are inducted to. Again, reorientation, ideally annually, would be another one that I would be highly encouraging you to go back and take a look at. When was the last time that you familiarised with all of your team members and your employees to your current policies and procedures? Again, it's not a great look that if all of a sudden the employer-employee relationship is starting to go south, you whip out a policy that has been in the filing cabinet for 10 years, and you're going to hold a particular employee or workplace participant to account on this particular document. It needs to be something that is embedded within the business, that you're regularly bringing to the forefront of mind. These are the expectations, and this is how we operate within this business against those particular expectations contained within those documents. So taking a look as a take-home follow-up from this is, when was the last time we reorientated our staff against our policies and procedures? Providing feedback early on, and regular feedback. There's a lot of blogs and information out there around annual performance reviews and the like. I think it's more moving in that direction of continuous reviews and feedback. I would say that a lot of the time I arrive within businesses, and I have a business owner, manager or leader that's particularly frustrated with an employee, and one of my first questions is, well, when did you start communicating that this wasn't going to plan, or you're unhappy with this type of behaviour, or they're not meeting your expectations? Is that all too often is, well, I sort of mentioned it, or I did drop the team an email about X, Y, and Z. Is that often is that employees just simply aren't aware that their performance is below expectations, and without that, I guess, direct, possibly talking about what, not who again, is what you would like to see more of or less of, and being able to provide that feedback as early as possible. And it can be seen as that it's actually more of a reflection of our management style than the actual employee being an underperformer. If they haven't actually been told, is that they can't adjust their behaviour to try and meet your expectations. If they honestly, hand on heart, believe that they are doing a good job, or they're finding their own way and they're making certain decisions, is that just because they're not a clone of yourself, is that people generally don't get out of bed to come and make a manager or leader's life miserable within their day-to-day work. Ultimately, left unattended, your frustrations are going to continue to escalate, and the return on investment for having that employee within your business will continue to decline. Some of the suggestions that I would be encouraging is that you don't have to jump straight into a disciplinary process. Is that there's quite a number of steps and avenues that you can really have a good impact on. Potentially a letter of guidance, so being able to spell out that in follow-up to our conversation today, I've indicated that X, Y, and Z I would like to see, B, C, and D outcome. I really look forward to ultimately supporting you, achieving in your particular position, and being able to put that on file. Again, good documentation is just a part of best practice leadership in this day and age. You could move straight into a performance improvement plan with an employee, again, a little bit more structured. It might be if this has been going on for a little while and you're trying to segue, or if that particular style of employee would respond best to more of a structured approach versus a less more informal approach to start with to get the conversation started. So horses for courses, and again, there's no cookie cutter approach to performance management. What we're trying to do is make sure that our inputs, our employees within our businesses are aligned to our business strategy, which produces productivity, which hopefully adds to the bottom line ultimately. Okay, so I get asked a lot about, well, I have to issue 3 warnings to an employee before I can move them on from my business. Ultimately, it isn't that black and white. You don't necessarily need to give 3 warnings, first warning, second warning, and the like. You know, ultimately, you don't even need to give any warnings, but if you did get challenged in a fair work scenario, is that you would certainly need to rely on and be able to produce what documentation you have to be able to demonstrate that you've conducted a procedurally fair process for that employee. The avenue and the options that you have available to you will certainly depend on the history, how you've communicated your expectations over the time, and the seriousness of the current incident. Look, it could be a combination of warnings. On many occasions, the only option is to move to a first and final due to the seriousness of it. There could be the requirement to take them through a show cause why your employment shouldn't be terminated, or look, if it's very much a serious misconduct matter, which is, I guess, somewhat different to an underperformance matter, is that there has been a serious breach of the employer-employee relationship, is that you can move to termination. I really think communicating, documenting well from the very start, diary notes or the like as a leader or manager will help you weigh up the best course of action to ensure that you are minimising any risks or direct risks to your particular business because you've completed an unfair, unlawful process when dealing with a performance matter with an employee. Look, and also one of the other points, leaving aside a very formal documentation process, is that a disciplinary process could also provide choices to an employee. Are we working to that employee's strengths? We obviously seen some benefit of having them in the business because they successfully process themselves through the onboarding process. If they aren't coming up to scratch from a performance angle, is that they might do really well in another area of the business, such as changing a position. They might not be at the level that the position is requiring, and they actually mutually accept a demotion, and it's a win-win for the business. You're not going out to have to find new talent. You can work to individuals' strengths as part of a performance management process and try and achieve a win-win from the whole process, so to speak. But again, no cookie cutter approach. Communicate and document really well, and seek advice. If you're not confident in this particular space, is that certainly reaching out and seeking advice from the many different avenues that are out there, is that over time, that as a leader or a manager yourself, is that you will become more competent and confident in this particular space. Workers' compensation and performance management, I am asked about reasonably often, and I see it play out reasonably often in workplaces in this day and age. If you're looking for 2 or 3 take-home messages out of this particular webinar today, is to actually be aware of Section 11A of the Workers' Compensation Act. Certainly in recent years, I've been mixed up in helping and supporting business owners and managers understand what their rights are in this particular space. So, no compensation for psychological injury caused by reasonable actions of employers. Over the recent years, certainly my observation has been is that there is increased stress and psychological claims, so anxiety or depression being lodged as workers' compensation claims against businesses. Ultimately speaking, is that if you are able to demonstrate that that particular injury or alleged injury has occurred as part of a reasonable process that you've undertaken as a business owner or manager, is that that workers' compensation case won't be accepted as your organisation, you know, being liable. So taking a look, I've actually placed what the actual clause is into there. So no compensation is payable under this Act in respect of an injury that is a psychological injury if the injury was wholly or predominantly caused by a reasonable action taken or proposed to be taken by or on behalf of the employer with respect to transfer, demotion, promotion, a performance appraisal, a disciplinary process in relation to retrenchment or restructuring, or the dismissal of workers. The big message that I would really encourage is just to go back to making sure that if you are undertaking these processes, is that you continue to document, and you document really well, because it will certainly be an important part of being able to provide feedback and defence, so to speak, to whether your business is liable for this particular injury. Okay. One of my other go-to processes is around mediation. Yes, mediation certainly comes up as a quite formal process. If I was to bring this up very early on in a performance management process, is that most people take well, this is, you know, getting out of hand, and really feel quite defensive about this process. In recent times, I've begun terming them more of a working relationship session. It could also be seen as like a facilitated coaching style of session, where the underperformer or whoever is not meeting the expectations is able to go through a process with their manager or a second party within the business to be able to really step through what is expected of them, being able to put both sides of the story, you know, forward in a safe manner, and being able to work through how we can actually take the relationship forward and ultimately get our performance back on track, and being able to say, honestly, I know what is expected of me on the side of the workplace participant, and yes, I agree that these are my expectations of what is required from the workplace participant, and ultimately certainly being able to see different perspectives and different styles of thinking, especially when managers and employees could be coming from different angles and different expectations, is that I'd really encourage you to think about this style of activity and using it within your performance management system, and I guess around that underperformance, and trying to do that reasonably early on. Again, another reason why is that recruitment is certainly expensive, and it could well be worth the attempt. I have been involved in and observed many really good written agreements that have come out of those working relationship sessions to take the whole relationship forward. So I really encourage you to think about how that could be used within your particular processes. Ultimately, as we wrap up, and we've certainly got hopefully some time for a couple of questions, is that again, going back to some of those proactive activities that you might be able to engage in to prevent you spending time in this particular space, is making sure that you've confirmed your position expectations, so the employee knows I'm doing a good job when I'm delivering on these particular aspects, making sure that you're communicating the organisational values early on, talking about your team DNA, what are those guiding principles and what is important. Really using those descriptive words around personal behaviours, what works really well for the organisation, what do you find that is naturally gravitates to certain teams within the organisation, and how that fits and what works really well. Ultimately, we are needing to be consciously aware that we can't have identical clones of us as managers and leaders, and we need to be able to have people that come in and dovetail with us. Showing vulnerability as a manager or supervisor is also really important as part of this as well. One of the other and final points is a part of all of this is that we actually have quite a human element to this, and are we acutely aware as managers and supervisors of the employee's own career aspirations, and are they aligned, and are they actually suitable and achievable for us to have win-win situations with the individual and with our businesses? Because ultimately the more aligned we can be, the more successful the outcome is going to be with having that person within your business providing a return on investment for whatever you need them to do. So why out of all of this is that ultimately you really good proactive performance management is around encouraging that strong performance, linking it to the achievement of productivity, and hopefully is that we're achieving profit on that bottom line for your business. Okay, we have some questions. We've got a couple of questions here. Alison, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, excellent. I was wondering whether I'd lost you. Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes. I know that we're
yes, we do. We've still got time, Tamara. I think that we've had some interesting questions, so if you've got time to go through them, we'd love to hear your answers.
Great. Okay, well, one of the questions that has come in is how to handle direct reports that are too defensive and aggressive. Certainly, I have observed that can well be the case. The 2 or 3 points that I would be encouraging there is to be really prepared. Have that opportunity to seek additional support with handling those particular conversations or sessions. Maybe another person within the business that can provide some facilitation to really help get those conversations started. Ultimately, it also just is being mindful about your strengths and being able to put your best foot forward. If you're someone that isn't going to be able to, verbally, do really well in these particular situations, is that have those meetings, but follow it up with a succinct letter about what your expectations are. One of the other questions is, when is it too late to commence a performance management process? That there would be, look, it's never too late if that person's still employed by your business, is that it isn't too late to really be able to provide feedback and a process around performance management. Another question that we've had today is, I find it tricky managing performance with employees who are suffering from mental illness. What tips do you have? This is something that I'm observing a lot more of people reaching out for support in this particular area. The first and foremost step is certainly to look at the health side of this, the real true human element of that. Ultimately, you could be facing a situation where the employee doesn't or isn't aware that they are unwell or acting out of character, or all of those different types of things. Certainly looking at how you can have an impact from the health side of things before you naturally revert to, well, what does our policy or procedure say? We are dealing with humans, and we do need to do the best thing for everyone in that situation. I have seen some really good outcomes and observed being able to instigate mental health training into workplaces, so people can observe and be able to support people better in those situations. How do you motivate non-performers? I think this goes back to some really foundational aspects here, is that as a business owner, manager, leader, is that we need to be aware is that we can't directly motivate an individual. We may be able to have an influence and indirectly motivate them, but ultimately we really need to understand the people that are within our teams and in our workplaces and what makes them tick. They have a view of things, and what we need to do is that if we're more self-aware about what motivates them individually, being able to look at how we can work with them to align them to the organisation is certainly one aspect. But you're never ever going to be able to go out and as they walk through your front door of a morning say, right, you are now motivated, is that's got to be internally generated because they can see a purpose and a future of being within the business. So certainly that's something that is not going to be able to be achieved out of a performance management policy, procedure and the like. That's, I guess, more of a foundational process to understand what you can do there. Okay, Alison, should we move to our poll?
Fantastic, yes. So absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Tamara. Really very grateful to you for sharing your insights there. We are almost finished. We've had a lot of questions, and I think we may even run another webinar if people are interested on this topic. Do get back in touch with us if you'd like, and let us know if that's going to be of interest to you. We will certainly also send out some questions and answers because there were so many of them, and just give you some more information on this topic of performance management. So just to help us out, if we could just have a rerun of our poll. You should see it there on your screen. We're just going to use your feedback to help us refine and improve our future webinars. So once you're done with that, thank you, great. And just letting you know that if you want to drop us a line, then you can contact us on customer service, or that's all one word, at hradvance.com.au if you have any follow-up questions, and make sure to log on to HR Advance for your practical management of your HR work. If you want to revisit today's presentation, an email will shortly follow this webinar, and that will give you a link where you can watch the video. Keep an eye on our newsletter for details of our next webinar for next month. Thank you so much for listening. It's been great to have you with us.